You're watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. House Democrat Will Davis from Hazel Crest, the south suburbs, joins us now. It's good to have you here in the building. Welcome back.
Good to be back.
I want to get your reaction to Governor Pritzker's remarks this week and his budget office and the comptroller. We got this $7.5 billion coming from Congress in federal relief. The comptroller's office and the governor's office of management and budget feel strongly that they can go ahead, they have the discretion to spend all of that money if they need to on debt. The state's various debts that we have, because those debts were already appropriated. What do you say?
Well, I would maybe slightly disagree with that, and we certainly want to take care of our obligations, but let's recognize that in the governor's introduced budget, we are making pension payments. We are making some of our debt obligation payments as part of our walk into the budget. So here's an opportunity for the governor to look at where maybe he flat funded some things, some very important things like the EBF school funding formula, and say maybe we could take 350 million of that, or maybe even a little more, and say let's push it into the school funding formula. We didn't fund it last year. We didn't add any new money last year. His budget doesn't propose any new money this year. So here's a unique opportunity to take those federal dollars.
Even though, so in a separate part of the federal relief, there was $5 billion for K-12 education, which is a hefty sum. Now, maybe it's replenishing some lost funds during COVID, but a lot of schools weren't meeting in person. I don't know how those expenses might have altered or changed during the coronavirus, but schools are getting $5 billion in relief this year. Does that alleviate that pressure at all?
Well, no, not really, because the uniqueness about those dollars is that the federal government said you must disseminate them using the Title I formulary. And every school in the state of Illinois gets Title I funding, and that's a good thing. And some schools get more than others. But again, if we're talking about the EBF, a formula that we worked hard to pass 3 years ago, had 3 years of success in adding new dollars to it, then Title I is one thing, but the EBF is something completely different. So why not use resources, available resources, and put money into the EBF?
Is that part of it, that there were so many years, maybe decades, of effort into getting that deal done, the education funding formula, and now 2-3 years later, it seems to have stalled, at least in the actual mechanism of putting new money into education. Is that part of what is driving, beyond just the value of funding education, but the fact that it took so long to get that, and now it's just sort of languishing?
Not necessarily. I mean, good things take a long time in Springfield to get done, and this was just indicative of that because we wanted to get it right. But we have significant success with the funding formula, and I think certainly on my side of the aisle, and I would argue some on the other side of the aisle, agree that this is the best effort that we've put forward in a very long time to help our school districts. Let's continue the effort and put some new money into the formula.
Mm-hmm. We're seeing a redistricting, a remapping process coming up soon. What is a fair map?
A fair map is a map that represents, to make sure that we are taking care of minority populations, giving them opportunity and access to represent their communities with the people who they elect. From my perspective, that's a fair map. I know others are concerned about what would be classified as gerrymandering, how you redraw the districts, but on some level, when you get down to the granular level of it, you have to make those kinds of adjustments to try to get to what I would call a fair map. Just having boxed districts, in my opinion, just simply does not work.
And the U.S. Supreme Court has said one of the things you cannot do when building a map is gerrymander racial minorities out of districts to dilute their voting strength. So there is a leg to stand on there from the U.S. Supreme Court. But it's also just complicated, I think, in where people live. Take Chicago and the surrounding suburbs. There was a recent article, I think, by Rich Miller on Capitol Facts, who went through and surveyed and said, really, in Illinois, the maps have, by and large, helped black voters elect black elected officials in those districts. But the Hispanic populations have not seen that same representation. How do you make sure both are represented?
Well, I mean, you have to use data that's available. I mean, take a good, honest look at where the populations are. I think in some cases what you find with Latino residents is that they are more concentrated than black residents. We're a little bit more spread out than they are. So yeah, they're getting put into districts, but unfortunately, because they're so spread out, that's where you might have to look at what we would call gerrymandering to try to figure out how to make sure that there are enough of them, meaning enough of Latino voters in a district to make sure that you elect a Latino voter. But I would argue also, even in black districts, many of our black districts are still only hovering around 50%, maybe 60, and even some are even below the majority, but we're still finding ways to get elected, and that's because of how we represent ourselves and how we represent the people in our districts. And yes, we are black representatives, but we understand the diversity that exists in our districts, and we want to represent that diversity regardless of what their race, ethnicity, or background may be.
All right, we're going to hear more about redistricting in a minute, but before we let you go, Representative, I want to put you on the spot here for a little bit. Lawmakers put about 6,900 bills. They filed almost 7,000 bills this session, and when you go through and look at them, there are some interesting ideas. I know bill review is always a fun time of year. Are there some that just stick out, your bills, other bills that you've seen that you go, now how'd they get that idea?
It's hard to say with so many of them. It's certainly hard to keep up with them. But I mean, sometimes, members, we watch enough television and we say, oh, they're doing that in that state. Well, maybe we should try it in this state, regardless of how crazy or kind of quirky the idea may be. But I mean, I think your viewers have to acknowledge that a lot of what we put forward comes from just regular everyday people in our districts and people that we encounter. So what you're seeing is the manifestation of the legislative ideas from just your neighbors, people across the street from you that say, hey, I think maybe this should be a law, and they bring it to their lawmakers, and sometimes those things move forward.
Democracy in action. There you go. Representative Will Davis, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
House Republican Tim Butler is next. He's representing the House Republicans in their effort on redistricting. We're going to hear from him and how he views a fair map. That's next.